Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Squares, and Purrs. My name's Leslie, and you guessed it, we are here to discuss the Vampire Lestat. I'm so excited. Um, I've been staying up late, writing notes, and just kind of feeling myself, I don't know, running on adrenaline, I guess. So the last segment, I talked about Interview the Vampire. It was kind of lengthy, so most likely I'm gonna bringing up this segment so they're not so long. All right, so where do we start? Let's just let's just get into it, and hopefully it's not as chaotic as I think it's gonna be. Downtown Saturday night in the 20th century, 1984. In comes Lestat. He is a rock star, and 1984 is like present day when this book was published by Anne Rice. It was published in like 1985. And so he wakes up from a long slumber. He joins a band called Satan's Night Out, which is so Lestat. And we do get this. We get like a lot of information in this, but what I love about Anne Rice's writing is it doesn't ever feel like an info dump. It just feels like I just love the way that she world builds and character builds, and it feels I don't know, it feels like lived in, believable, even though we're reading about these like this fantastical gothic literature tale. And there's we learn about the amplified voices. We did get an understanding of them about the vampire network a little bit, I think, in Interview the Vampire, but very lightly. I feel like it's more present in the Vampire Lestat. And something that Lestat really taps into when he wakes up and he's in this band is that he's looking at the present day world and seeing that he fits right into it. That the 1700s and 1980s kind of like mirror each other in terms of where they're at. Like wasn't a lot of like language hurdles, um, and because he has slumbered before and woken up before, right? And so there was also like this constant industrial progress going on, and right now that's not going on in the way that he experienced before. So this is an easy, smooth adjustment for him in a way, and he's a character who, I guess, juxtaposed against Louis. It, for most part, is atheist. This is something that he questions, but he keeps going back to being uh, atheist in his beliefs. And so now that he's in this time where there's a balance of like secular and religious morality, it's just another example of like how he feels like he fits in so well. Um, so ultimately, it feels like Lestat was born for this particular age that is the middle of the 1980s. Um, what he does also bring up that I like, because I think this is something that Anne Rice sprinkles throughout the other books, is although they're it's not like the Industrial Revolution, there's not like, these booming changes, it's different, it's computer technology and such, and so he will, like, ponder, like, "Oh, I wonder how all the other vampires, especially the really old ones, how are they dealing with these technological, changes? Like, how are they adjusting to this?" And if they can't, then they're I think for him, he's like, "Oh, they're probably most likely hiding out," right? And this is actually a bit of a tip off of the coven that he runs into later, and why he thinks this particular uh, train of thought. So ultimately, Lestat learns about Interview the Vampire, which is it's funny how he finds out about the book being published by his ex-lover, which is that it's become a bestseller, and his bandmates happen to have a copy, and he eventually ends up going and seeing it at a bookstore and ends up picking up a copy, and he even mentions putting that copy he's read it like several times and putting it in his breast pocket. And I really like that a detail that the television show picked up on, because in season 2, when Louis is this is like when he's in Paris and he keeps thinking about Lestat. And so when every time we see Lestat or we experience Lestat, it's not really Lestat, it's a projection of what Louis thinks this person that he was once with would say, because he misses him so much. And one of the scenes, one of like the last scene where we see him project this version of Lestat, this version of the dream stat says, "Oh well, I had your initials embroidered in my breast pocket," and I kind of feel like that might be a nod to this moment because he's read the book over and over again that Louis wrote that angers him, makes him miss Louis, but ultimately it's his breast pocket that he puts it in, which is close to his heart. So I'm assuming that's kind of where they took it from because they're just so detail oriented and always putting like these Easter eggs together for us. And I really love that because, Dreamstat, this may not be something that he ever really did. It's just like a figment of his imagination, of Louis' imagination. But in the books, it's something that very much happened as far as like the copy of the book somehow. My copy is like a big old one, so that wouldn't work. But I just thought that was a really beautiful moment. But at the same time, it upsets him and he shreds it at the same time. And that is symbolic of like who Lestat is. He's a person with um, extreme emotions, and he always goes to extremes, right? And so by the end of this section, we just realized that, or Lestat's telling us that he's always been a rule breaker and he will continue to be a rule breaker, and how Louis writing that book just made him make a decision that he was going to tell his story and he was just going to continue to break like breaking the rules of all rules and writing his story as well. And it's not just a rebuttal. He's really talking about all his life before he met Louis. And like on page 15, he writes, "Of course, I hated him for the lies he told about me, but the love was far greater than the hate. He had shared the dark and romantic years of the 19th century with me. He was my companion as no other immortal had ever been. The story I could not tell him before is what he's going to tell." And he goes, "Old rules didn't matter to me now either." And so that really just like stuck out to me, and how he's clearly saying that that Louis is being dishonest. But the thing is, this is like each story is told from each character's point of view, so there will always be room for maybe what we're hearing isn't like exactly the truth. And that's something that the television show really tapped into that I loved. And I look forward to seeing how that's going to be handled in season 3, because although it's going to focus on Lestat's life prior to Louis, I'm sure they're going to step into some moments here and there, like just a little bit, peppering in their time together. And I just wonder how much are we as an audience going to believe, right? Because we as an audience we have to watch a show and then kind of like sift through both their tellings of the tale and figure out, okay, how much of this is true, how much of this is BS to make you look good in this scenario, right? Oh my god, it's so good. So okay, here we're about to dip into the early education adventures of the Vampire Lestat, Part 1, Lelio Rising. So we traveled back through the tale with Lestat 2 decades before the French Revolution. He's I think the last son of 7 kids. 3 lived, so there's quite a bit of tragedy back then. He tried to leave twice, and something that really stuck out to me, like early on, we in that first page, and Rice is letting us know that this person tried to get away from his family twice, and he refers to him being brought back home as having his wings broken. And throughout this book, I don't know if it's all works of the Chronicles, but definitely in Into the Vampire and the Vampire Lestat, there's quite a bit of like nature symbolism going on, especially in this book. There's quite a bit of I guess you could say bird symbolism coming on. And so Lestat is someone that keeps having his wings broken, and I think that's also important because ultimately that is something that he did to Claudia later on in life. So it's interesting how ultimately you think he would have gone through what he went through with his family and decided consciously to break the cycle, but we actually just see that he just kept that cycle going, unfortunately. So I don't feel bad for Lestat, okay? Um, we get a sense of like how people dressed back then. The Parisians tiptoed around in high heels, satin slippers, pinched snuff, and dabbed at their noses with embroidered handkerchiefs. This is not necessarily how he and his family dressed. He was a hunter in his family. That was basically like his role. He was unhappy in his life, and so definitely in his human life, he just uh, feels very lost. And ultimately, that enters a character that I equally feel that I love and can't stand. And that is Gabrielle, his mother. uh, I have so many feelings, and I kind of feel like the Lestat character at times, where there's like these extremes emotions for a character. And I'm so glad that Anne Rice wrote such a complex character. I don't know what to say. I don't necessarily think that she's like completely unlikable. There are plenty of ways that I feel like I don't know, relate and empathize with the character. And so Lestat also refers to Gabrielle, who's his mom, as saying early on like that he has this unshakable love for her, and that she never said anything ordinary. And I that's something that also like struck me. And early on, if this is like your first time reading the book, you would think, oh, that's sweet, he really like loves his mom. No. This is foreshadowing something else that we'll get to later, okay? um but I like the idea that saying that she didn't say anything ordinary because she is uh I think she wants to burst out into being her true self, which is someone that's unconventional of the time, and unfortunately probably still of this time right now, right? And she was someone that didn't really speak often, but when she did, every word she says holds weight. It has purpose and it has meaning. And something that frustrated me about Gabrielle throughout this book, the more we learn, is that she knew how to write in several different languages. She knew how to speak in several different languages, yet her kids were illiterate. And I think that we have this woman of the 1700s that um, you're having the opportunity to have this education. Why wouldn't you want to pass it on to your kids? It was just like so frustrating. So I was constantly grappling with the idea of why. Not that I think it's okay, but maybe because she was living under the constraints of the only way that she could, which is just she's supposed to marry and make kids. Um, and so maybe there was a resentment towards society on her part. And so I kind of wonder if maybe that's why she didn't want her kids to know how to read. Let me know what you think. If it was kind of like this resentment to um, the patriarchy and men for what she wouldn't be allowed to do, so therefore she wouldn't teach her kids to read because they're men. I'm kind of wondering. That's just like a theory I have right now. But let me know what you think. And I'm not saying that that makes it okay. I don't think it makes it okay. I'm just trying to like understand where the character is coming from. So yeah, that was really frustrating to see that she reads Italian, scribbles letters to Naples, but she's like, I'm not going to teach my kids, right? And so we learn about the first intervention um, that Lestat wants to learn. So his mom's not going to teach him, but she will champion for him to have some sort of education if that's what he wants. So she champions him going to a monastery to learn, and instead he just goes there and wants to dedicate himself. Um, And so his family yanks him back. They're like, "Look, you were there to learn. You weren't there to dedicate your life to something else." And we there's a couple of things going on here. One is that I think one of his brothers says like, "Oh, you always go to extremes," which is completely that really is Lestat. It's one or the other. There's no like he's just such a feeling person. And throughout the book, he's constantly crying. Not there's anything wrong with crying, but it's just like there's always his emotions are always like on his sleeve. And so when he gets snatched back home, he was told like, you know what, stay home with your father, play chess. This is what you're supposed to do. And once again, I feel like this is a another mirroring of what he does to Claudia because that's all he knows. When it comes to Claudia, he teaches her whatever because he feels like I think that's also the way of showing his love when it came to Claudia was just like teaching her skills. One of them was chess, but just anything that she also wanted to learn, he was there for her because um, he didn't really he wasn't treated that way. So I kind of think in that little way he was trying to that's how he was showing his love, I guess. And so this sounds cruel for him to be ripped away from something he wanted to do. But then later on in the book, I realized he's only 12 years old. So for me, I'm like, Lestat, you're a 12-year-old. Of course they're gonna bring you back home. What do you think? So that's something that you have to kind of like keep an eye on is just what details like Lestat places and when. And I just thought that was kind of like fascinating because at first you feel kind of like bad for him that he's not really getting a chance to do something that he wants to do. It's not like he's being wild or anything, but then later on you realize he's 12 and then I think to myself, of course they brought you back home. So the second intervention happens when Lestat is 16 and there's Italian troop that comes on in. um, and he just wants to join him and they snatch him back. His brothers take him. And so I find it fascinating that ultimately it's him trying to express himself and kind of like break out of the mold in some way from what he was told he's supposed to do. And he just ends up going back home like in misery, basically. So time passes and then he's quite unhappy and now he's 20 years old and guess what? He still doesn't know how to read or write. His mom will not teach him. That still gets me upset. And what upsets me about Gabrielle is that her solution is, "Oh, you're unhappy? Let me get you some puppies." I was just like, that just seems so messed up because, and also I think in her own way, she's trying to, again, not speaking, but show through actions, trying to make him feel better. So she gets some mastiffs because his mastiffs died when he was hunting early on and was able to kill a bunch of wolves so that everyone could eat. Um, and that was something that was revered, but clearly it's not like his love, but it's something that he's good at. And so I also think that's an indication of Lestat trying to find some sort of purpose. And in his misery, he's better at this thing hunting, just because I think he's just trying to like occupy himself. Um, and something else that really irritates me about Gabrielle, speaking of not speaking unless she really has something to say, and she says these like not ordinary things, is that when Lestat is, he's in his 20s, he's miserable. Gabrielle, her way to relate to her son, or actually, she doesn't need to relate. She just needs to listen. But she's like, yeah, you know what? I, I like. She understands him because she's also miserable, and she just dreams of going into the village and getting like railed by a bunch of men. I was just like, and not caring about her family. I just thought that was wild. And then after she says that, she's like, "Oh yeah, P.S. I'm dying." I'm like, "What?" She's just like so. I'm like, "Wow, you really do not know how to connect with others." It was pretty bad. I was just like, "This is peak unhinged," and also that also seems like I don't know. It seems like an extreme on its own, and I feel like I understand. Lestat so much more with the people that in his life that should care and protect them, but instead they're over here talking about themselves. I don't know. Their adult parent is wild. And something that really like stuck out to me is was Gabrielle was saying she hated the inertia and the hopelessness of our life here as much as I did, which is that Lestat was saying that. And now after 8 children, 3 living, 5 dead, she was dying. This was the end of her. And so we get an understanding that she basically was just living a life she didn't really want to, but that's all that was available to her. So after his mom drops that bomb of what she's going through, enter Nicholas de Lafont, I think is how I say his name. Um, he's like the spokesperson for the village. They want to give Lestat a gift because he's now dubbed the Wolf Killer because he killed all these wolves that really helped people out during the winter just to survive. And so, what I love about this moment is after all this time, Lestat can still remember what Nicholas was wearing, which is like this uh, rose gold lace and then like gold shoes, like, and just the idea of him seeing this person all decked out, and he was like, "He's mine." That's what I feel like he was thinking at the time. Anyway, so um, Nicholas gave him this coat. It's like we call it the Wolf Killer coat, and we see that they have an interaction because Nikki actually also feels equally infatuated with Lestat. He feels like he's seeing someone he could connect with, because Lestat's, I think, brother was like, "Oh, you're just so impossible." But for Nikki, he's like, "Oh, I too am an impossible, and only the impossible can do the impossible." And that is really about his love for the violin and how this ultimately seals their friendship because Nikki loves playing the violin, and I kind of feel like it's a similar situation where Lestat wanted to join the monastery. Nikki loves the violin, and his family's like, "No, you're not pursuing the violin as a career. That's like not a career. That's it's not even a career at that time." And so there's this kinship over feeling like they're not really like fitting into like the conventions of their time, and desperately wanting to like push against that. They're just feeling like they're outsiders, but at least they found each other, right? Um, and this gives Gabrielle an idea, and which also says a lot about Gabrielle, which is go spend time with Nikki. This person like makes you feel something. So you know what? Go and do it because if anything, this will at least piss off your brothers. And she likes that. And that's what's so funny about her is that she lives vicariously through Lestat, but also she's like this passive antagonist, if that makes any sense. And that reminds me so much of Louis. That's to me, throughout this book, there are moments where I get that Anne Rice is actually trying to like thread like the tragedy of Nicholas being so similar to Louis in ways. But I also see a lot of like how Gabrielle is and acts, and I see just as much of her in Louis as I do Nikki, which is like a dangerous combination, right? So no wonder Lestat ends up falling in love with Louis. Um, so during Nicholas and Lestat's like human relationship, it's really them drinking, talking, philosophizing about life. They are two like they're like mean, they're mercurial emotions, and they're both like yearning for a purpose. And Nikki, we learn really early on, is this he's constantly melancholy throughout his human life. Um, and even when Lestat has moments where, excuse me, he is being revered for being the wolf killer, even that kind of makes him feel more alone because ultimately, I don't think his character really feels like he's being seen, I guess. Yeah, not really seeing for who he really is. But when he's with Nikki, he feels like he's being seen. And so they have these like beautiful conversations. Like something that stood out for me that Nikki says is that fashion is everything, even atheism is fashion. And that's kind of his rebuttal to what he's hearing from Lestat, because Lestat didn't believe in God, but he believed in the monks, which is very interesting. So I also feel like Lestat's also looking for I almost feel like he's looking for a family or a way to commune with others in a way that he doesn't feel like he can in his own and home life, I should say. And what really stuck out to me about the dynamic, which is also gonna allude to what happens between uh, Lestat and his mother later, is like on page 43. Um, he writes, "The words began to pour out of me as they had out of him, and soon we're talking about 1,000 things we had felt in our hearts, varieties of secret loneliness, and the words seemed to be essential words the way they did on those rare occasions with my mother. And as we came to describe our longing and dissatisfaction, we were saying things to each other." Ooh, if I can get to it. "With great exuberance." So really, he felt seen by him. But once again, we have these moments where he's like, "Oh, I, I feel so connected to him," and then saying, "Just like with my mom," and I'm like, "No, please stop doing this because I know where it's going." And random thought. Then we go later on because this is like where the relationship changes between Nikki and Lestat, and so Nikki keeps at least referring to him in a formal way, even they are having these intimate conversations, and he keeps calling him Monsieur. And so Lestat says, "Just call me by my name." And random thought that made me think of "Call Me by Your Name," which is, I don't know. This is where my brain went, but great book if you haven't read it. Um, and also another book, I'll bring it up right now before I go because I think I'm gonna forget. Just hearing them talk about their relationship together and how like they would have these intense conversations, and how Louis will be the kind of person that will he'll I'm sorry, Lestat will basically was like when he's talking to Nikki, they go from like calling each other by their formal names to calling each other by the names to Lestat being like, "We're gonna love each other forever," because that's who Lestat is. To like reaching over the table to kiss Nikki and like fumbling on the table. And that reminded me also of another book called Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. So if you haven't read this, pick it up too. I gotta stick some recommendations while I'm having this conversation. And that's just because you know what James Baldwin just tapped into like the intensity, similar to like when Anne Rice is writing, the intensity of intimacy and emotions in a way. And so at times when I'm reading Anne Rice's The Vampire Lestat, I would start thinking about this book in particular. So yeah. Yeah, these two are it's just this is wild to read about these two together. And something that Nikki also really tapped into is that he tells Lestat sin always feels good. We are partners in sin. And Lestat also panics just thinking about um that we exist in the present and there's nothing on going on beyond that existence. And that really speaks to his atheism, but that really like panics him as well. I think he's just having like this crisis to the point of almost like being going mad in a way, like on the verge of that. And that's really speaks to the relationship between him and Nikki. I feel like they almost take turns losing their minds. So as much as Lestat intensely loves him, it's clearly like not a good situation. It's very toxic. And so they run away together. It's being toxic. They run away together to Paris to join the theater troupe there. And this is something that his mom is okay with because once again, she's all about like living vicariously through Lestat and is like, yeah, go ahead, run away and do your thing. Um, and something that Lestat does, and I love Anne Rice for this, is that he changes his stage name to Lestat de Valui. And I thought that was so wild that Anne Rice does this after the fact, right? She's writing this and really kind of seeing, like, maybe on a surface level, what would have been the attraction between Lestat towards Louis in Interview the Vampire, right? Because even his stage name had a connection with the person he falls in love with, like, later on in life. And so I love that little detail. And going to the talk about the show, the season one, episode one, when Louis and Lestat meet, they're sitting at a table together, and Lestat rubs Louis the wrong way. Um, and when Louis introduces himself, because Lestat asks his name, he says, "My name's Louis de Point du Lac," and Lestat goes, "Of course, Louis. Louis, of course it's Louis." And so I love that little Easter egg because, the writers read all the book, they know that connection of Lestat's stage name to him meeting, like, the love of his life, which is, like, so wild. And I just love the attention to detail on the television show. They knocked it out of the park. Um, yeah, anyway, I'm just gonna keep praising the show the whole way through. Um, but we also see that as an actor, Lestat starts to feel like he's not really quite putting it this way, but I feel like he feels like he has a purpose, and I find it interesting that Lestat feel like he's coming into his own, feeling like he has a purpose, but only when he's actually working to perform as somebody else. I think that's very telling. And so, um, among the many conversations that Nikki and Lestat have, like on page 63, is about, like, I feel like they're having a conversation about what matters, as they often do, and how Lestat is like kind of he has this like tunnel vision of um we have death and life is meaningless, but maybe we can make life good. And Nikki is like frustrated with his like maybe like obsession with goodness. And he goes on to say, "There's weakness and there's strength, and there is good art and bad art. And that is what I believe in. At the moment, we are engaged in making what is rather bad art, and it has nothing to do with goodness." And so I love that he's taking a dig at what they're doing, but also that life is filled with so many different things. But the fact that Nikki is so wrapped up in when what matters is uh, like the dimensions of art, really makes me think that he only believes in like what's tangible at the moment, which is like an interesting conversation to have. And from that, we lead into the early education and adventures of the Vampire Lestat, Part 2, The Legacy of Magnus. All right, I can't believe I'm barely on part 2. This is gonna be long. I might just do part 2 and then we'll see how far we go. I don't want to make this too long. All right. So at the end of part 1, we're kind of getting this indication that Lestat was being stalked. He was, and when Nikki and Lestat are asleep, it's cold. He's snatched up by Magnus, and they break through the window, run out, and so he's kidnapped. He's kidnapped by Magnus, a vampire. He takes him to his lair. It's disgusting. There's all these other dead bodies, and through, I guess, like Magnus has this like the power to show like Lestat like the visions of what's going on with him, and he shows him his past and that he was an alchemist and that he stole the vampiric power, which is it's he's a monster. Vampire is already a monster, but Magnus is like a rogue vampire monster, like on a different level. And it's just a it's just a wild existence. So Lestat is in his human form, is disgusted by him. He gets turned into a vampire, very much against his will. And it's I don't know what this says, but it's like once Lestat is turned into a vampire, he then is very much enthralled with his maker. But his maker has different plans, which is basically um, live the life that you want. Guess what? I'm leaving you a buttload of money and I'm gonna hop into this fire. So he's given like he's given Lestat very little tutelage. And so there's this person takes him and then like abandons him, basically. Um and so I do find it interesting in that as Lestat is like being transferred into a vampire, he spent his whole life feeling like he had no purpose, but instead, when he becomes a vampire, he then feels like he's getting what he always wanted. There's like this erotic love and purpose kind of like intermingled. And he, you know what, it's something that also Lestat does. He says, I love you to a lot of people. And so one of those people are the one is Magnus that changed him. And I find that interesting. He we'll see a pattern. It's kind of like too early on, but this is definitely an indication this is someone I feel like if anyone said to Lestat that they loved him, he would just be like, I love you too. He's just so quick with his emotions. And it's not always like a positive thing when it comes to him. And like he had like a little bit of a bumpy road when it came to making himself like unalive people. But once he starts doing it, he's like, oh, this is like the delicious elixir of life. And that I think that also speaks to um, what Nikki was saying earlier, that they sin. And I feel like Lestat really is what he always maybe didn't realize he wanted to be, but like he's doing all these terrible things, but he just feels so good. And that's something that Anne Rice really like tapped into when it comes to Lestat, because this is a contrast to Interview the Vampire. Louis was someone that was miserable as a vampire, is so unhappy with being a vampire, about his existence. What does that mean? Um, Constantly pushing up against like spiraling within his like Catholic belief system versus being a vampire and where that fits in everything in the world and the universe. But Lestat is someone that is so much fun in the book because once he becomes a vampire, he's genuinely having fun. He doesn't have anyone to teach him, so he teaches himself. He'll go to a small village and he'll start munching on everyone, trying to figure out what can he do with these powers. And so that is it's vicious and fun all at the same time. But there is this like airiness that's going on because he does sense a presence and he just doesn't know what it is yet. Um, so that's something that we kind of have to like be aware of as we're going. Like something's going on, but he's not quite sure and it's not really his focus. And what I also like is that we get introduction to Pierre and Roget, which is like the attorney that handles his business. And what I love about this attorney so much is that um, amongst everyone else as a human, like something that Louis came across in Interview the Vampire is just that like what he would tell someone or when he would reveal himself to someone, it would scare humans. And so there's this like wanting to engage with humanity and in other words to like continue to evolve but also not really being able to because it's dangerous. So that's where vampires get kind of like uh, stuck, right? But Lestat meets this attorney, makes it really clear who he really is. Like, hey, I'm a vampire. I have a lot of money. Could he help me with this? And the this attorney is like, okay, cool. Like, and he fully believes him because Lestat could hear his thoughts. And that always cracked me up that there was like, I don't know what that that says a lot of things because also his attorney is really like practical, if that makes any sense. Maybe it's money just talks. I don't know. But that also speaks to like um maybe the mental fortitude of the attorney because the attorney goes through quite a bit in this book. But that just like tickled me how quickly his attorney was really willing to like just believe him. He's like, yeah, you're a vamp. I'll help you with your money. And so Lestat buys the what he calls the Rat Trap Playhouse. And so he's basically tossing around money that he has um, to his family and friends, to the theater, he thinks he's never gonna see them again, but at least he could do this thing for them that he probably thought he would never get a chance to do, financially. He's definitely someone that with, like, new money, right? And he's just like, you get money. I'll give you toys, I'll give you everything." But this is not something that, sits well with Nikki. Nikki, the last time he saw him, Lestat was taken away, and he also, I think Lestat tries to go somewhat near them and see how they're doing, and Nikki senses him, and I think that's wild when that happens because I feel like this is just an indication of like how intimately they're connected. That he's a human and he still senses, he knows Lestat is near, and it's just heartbreaking that that's something that Lestat has to run away from. And something else that I, I like randomly enjoyed was how Nikki, with the money, he didn't like change his clothes or anything. He just like stocked up on books, and that's like another little connection between Nikki and Louis because Louis also uh, had such a ferocious love of reading. And there's something on page 116 that kind of like tickled me, and that is how um, it's how humans are described through like the vampiric lens. And so it's written, when I spoke of Nikki's beauty the night before as a mixture of movement and color, but you can't imagine what it's like for us to look on living flesh. There are those billions of colors and tiny figurations of movement, yes, that make up a living creature on whom we concentrate, but the radiance mingles totally with the carnal scent. Beautiful, that's what any human being is to us. If we stop to consider it, even the old and the diseased, the downtrodden that one doesn't really see in the streets, they are all like that, like flowers ever in the process of opening, butterflies ever unfolding out of the cocoon. And so I love like this description of the beauty of humanity through the lens of a vampire. And random thought, it kind of reminded me of uh how vampires are written in, or not written, I haven't read the books, but on the movies Twilight, how like what do you call it? The vampires glitter. And I felt like this was like the opposite of that. It's not the vampires that glitter, but like the humans do through in a way. Anyways, that just kind of stuck out to me. But yeah, with that said, Lestat is like just can't help himself. He can't really stay away from the theater troupe, from Nikki. So he devises a plan that goes terribly. He thinks that, let me just feed a lot on humans before I see them, and maybe I could still be a part of the theater troupe. Maybe I could still spend time with Nikki. But there's a lot of having to, like dim the lights. He doesn't even want to look directly at Nikki, and he tries to perform, but when he performs, he uses his vampiric power in order to perform, and it scares the snot out of the audience and the troupe. Nikki knows something's wrong, and so ultimately, this is not something that can continue. And because Nikki knows something's up, but not quite sure what, he starts to go mad and he stops playing the violin. Um, and even though Lestat leaves because he's like, okay, that went really bad, he throws money at the theater troupe and they kind of like forget about it because, again, money speaks. They're just like, okay, that was weird, but our theater is going to continue. Um, and so here we have Lestat realizing he can't engage with the person that he loves. He can't engage with the profession that made him feel like he had purpose. And he finds out from his attorney that Gabrielle is in Paris, basically as like a last wish, to spend time with Lestat before she dies. And that's basically where part two ends. And this segment has gone on so long. I'm going to go ahead and stop here. And I'm going to break this up into several parts. There's no other way I could do this. And yeah, so if you've been watching so far, please tell me what you think about these sections. I wish I could have done this live, but if I had talked about this live, I would have just on and on and on and on, and I wouldn't have gotten, I mean, this would have been a whole day extravaganza. So thank you for being here. If you're new here, please subscribe, like, and definitely I look forward to your comments below, okay? I'll see you in the chat.